Hello, Houston. We're just sitting here fussing about a person who's going to come visit us toward the end of the lecture. Sorry if I look a little disorganized this morning. Last time, we had been talking about why people work, and I was going through a series of theories, and the problem that I had right at the end was caused by the fact that normally I turn pages left. This time I turned one to the right, and I couldn't find it. So I just wanted to go back over and review with you the important elements of behavioral theory as that bears on how we explain why people work. The key thing here is motivation, which is one of the keys in behavioral theory. Motivation can be increased, decreased, or can remain the same through a worker's entire career. But the prime example there is the issue of rewards and punishments in behavioral theory. A good example, for instance, would be that entrepreneurs who are in business for themselves will recognize that the harder they work, the bigger the rewards they are likely to earn through profits and so forth. Theoretically, more work means more profit. Problems with that are that in any organization, what constitutes a reward for one may be a detriment for another. For instance, a trip. If a trip was being awarded as a reward for hard work or good work, a trip for an administrator might be viewed as a plus. Get out and meet the competition, get to be known in one's own social network and so forth. That might be good, but on the other hand, for a researcher, it would be a hindrance to his or her ongoing research for the company. So the incentive programs have to be really applied quite judiciously in behavioral theory. And then we have a very different kind of almost social approach that was used. That was a series of three theories, X, Y, and Z. Theory X is kind of pessimistic. It views people as having a dislike for work and a tendency to avoid taking responsibility for work-related behavior. To manage that kind of a worker, what you have to do is use a manager who's very directive. Threats and punishers may be a key element in that kind of a management style. And the idea is that the company is essentially taking the position that we will not involve the lazy, indolent workers in any kind of decision-making relative to management. Theory Y takes a very different kind of perspective. In this case, what it does is to view work as natural as any of the other activities in which we may engage in a given situation, and it's pursued simply for its own satisfaction. The workers in this case are viewed as industrious, responsible, and creative, and that ultimately led to theory Z proposed by Uchi, I guess that's the way it's pronounced, O-U-C-H-I, in which he was arguing that the company is seen as essentially an extension of an employee's family. This is kind of the logical extension from theory Y. And that the work is not merely, or the environment is not merely a place of work. And this kind of a management theory would involve consulting workers on decisions that impact the work environment. Opinions are sought to improve the work environment and so forth. One good example of that is the plant that was built by Saturn in Tennessee. The idea being that traditional union corporation environments can be difficult to convert from one kind of mode to another, and therefore one of the reasons it is reported that Saturn moved to Tennessee to build that plant was simply to get away from the kind of entrenched union corporate relations that exist up in Michigan. But in any case, that entrenched organization is one thing that a kind of freewheeling plant like Saturn that more directly involves its workers in decision making is kind of a strong counterblow against. But it was a very innovative approach. It turns out the plant may be shut down not because of its own problems, but because the car may no longer be made. I wouldn't fault the excuse me, the organization that they used in the plant, just the car that they produced in that case. And one final theory that we could look at is basically the motivator hygiene model. It was originally proposed by Hertzberg some 50 years ago now. In this, you'll see a tie here in a moment to another theory that I'm sure you're already familiar with. But for his theory, hygiene are basic physiological and safety needs. They're met, for instance, by getting a paycheck, but that in and of itself does not assure job satisfaction. Motivator needs, on the other hand, have to be met for job satisfaction to occur. And in some ways, this is very similar to Maslow's theory, where safety and physiological needs are the two most fundamental. And the reason for the triangle here is the fact that each lower need on the list toward the bottom is considered to be more basic than the one or ones above it. The net result being that the most important thing for a family is food. And mothers and fathers, in fact, will sacrifice their own safety if the family simply does not have enough food. So the number one thing to be met is the food needs, the basic physiological, and then safety needs. But it turns out for Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the system basically involves three other things that really are getting closer to the work environment. One of which is a sense of belongingness, and the self-esteem and self-consciousness that is generated out of that, self-confidence that is generated out of that. To give you but one example here, the relationship between 3 and 4 can be illustrated by the initiations that fraternities and sororities use on college campuses, if you think about it. They will make their members do incredibly ridiculous kind of things. I can remember a number of years, it was fun, but I remember a number of years ago, a woman came into one of my introductory classes dressed in a very garish dress, which had a big stain on the left upper leg, above her knee, below her waist. It looked like a spaghetti stain, which is what it turned out to be. And in fact, she had been on a very important date, one that she had worked very hard to arrange, and her friends had helped participate in, and eventually had a date with a gentleman whom she was very interested in dating. And they went to a supper at Spaghetti Warehouse, and right in the middle of supper, her elbow hit her plate, and she ended up with the spaghetti all over her leg because the plate simply dumped into her lap. Very embarrassing. It ended up destroying the relationship, that and some other things. And so the sorority, in its infinite sensitivity, decided that the way she was going to be initiated was to wear that dress around and have to explain what was involved. In fact, the sign that they had her wear said, "Do not ask me about my most embarrassing date." And of course, she was wearing a dress, which clearly elicited questions, what's the spaghetti stain, and so forth. In any case, that's an example of the greater power or the more basic nature of the self-belonging kind of things, those pressures for group belongingness. A striving to esteem, basically we will do things at the lower level to make sure that the esteem is ultimately achieved in that kind of a situation. And finally then, in accord with Maslow's theory, we have the self-actualization. Theoretically, what's happening is that you're interacting with a world that is maximally supportive of you and that you are delivering important concepts or materials too. So basically, Whiteman, Lloyd, Dunn, and Hammer have a very good discussion of the factors that contribute to govern worker satisfaction, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. But what I do want to do is look at, for instance, career development. John Holland, for instance, suggested that matching personal orientation and occupation is one very important element of what we do in worker development. Let's suppose that you go to a party, okay? And in that party, in a magically six-sided room, we find a number of people clustered together by common interests or needs, whatever you want to call it, as often happens in parties. That is, people with similar interests have things to talk about and new findings to share and so forth. So they tend to cluster based on interests. And if this particular room were to settle out exactly as Holland would hope it would, we might find 6 groups indicating a primary interest in realism, kind of a hands-on, this is the world as it is, versus investigative, I wonder what would happen if approaches, artistic orientations, social orientations, those who are enterprising, trying to generate their own business or start one, and then the more conventional, let's follow the rules and see what happens kind of approach. Where would you go in that room if you were interested in taking one of those groups, participating in one of those groups? And the question is, what would happen if that group all of a sudden decided it wanted to go get pizza or something, and therefore it left the party? but you were not able to leave with them. So then where would you go? And that is essentially your second interest, as workers would, as measurers of career development would argue. And essentially what Holland has done is to develop a number of different tests to measure these 6 different, what he calls personal orientations. They're kind of core values that represent what we're interested in doing. And as you kind of walk down through which you'd be most interested in, you're basically identifying probably one of Holland's original 6 factors. And he's developed out of that a very clever self-directed search, or SDS, that can be used to help you identify not only aspects of your personality and occupations that you would be fitted to, but it turns out that people who are well matched between their personality and their occupation tend to be those who like their jobs and will stay employed in that job longer. They tend to remain there longer. Another one that achieves the same kind of effect is the strong interest inventory, which is another excellent test constructed and analyzed in terms of Holland's model. So the kind of occupations that may be associated with each of these types of personality would include things like, well, for instance, this graph, which is almost illegible. I created it deliberately to make it that way, and unfortunately the slide that I originally copied was simply copied blurred, and I didn't realize it until we put the program together. But in any case, just to give you a feel for what's involved here, if you were in the center area, if those were the way your interests fell out along the 6 dimensions that are measured by Holland, the central area there is what's called realism, or realistic, as I was talking or showing you the 6-sided model a little earlier. The careers along the bottom, which are the words you can't read tipped on their end there, the 4 careers that are identified as key to things like realism are farmer, carpenter, painter, and police officer. Each of those you can appreciate. People who have that kind of a job really have a career, a job orientation that they can park. I mean, when it's 5 o'clock, they can hang up their belt and go home and leave it there. There's nothing they can improve by taking it home and worrying about it. Somebody whose SDS measures look like this would be somebody who'd be most happy, most effective in all likelihood in a hands-on kind of a career, like farming or carpentry or something like that. At the other extreme on the left there, in that group are included skills like, or careers like artist, architect, and painter. I could not translate the rightmost of the 4 that are listed there. But as you can see, artist, architect, and painter share a lot in common with each other, somewhat different from what a farmer, carpenter, and so forth share. So these tests are really quite instructive in identifying what your general orientation toward life tends to be, life and occupation and so forth, and that in turn can be used then to predict which kind of a career you're most likely to be effectively challenged in and good at. Table 12.2 in the Whiten text has a number of different suggestions on careers that will evolve out of this kind of table. So with this then, let's swing into and look at a second element of the other half of our lecture notes having to do with career development. And in this case, what I'm going to do is to start with a key thing that we go through, and that is career choices. We talked last time in the previous lecture about some of the facts of the world of work. Today what I wanted to do was start by pointing out to you the extent to which factors beyond your control will influence your career. That is, some factors that are operating simply impact the choices you have, how effective they're likely to be, and so forth. This would include, very obvious at this point in the late 10s, early teens years, the economy is a key factor in what jobs are and are not available in any given situation. Changing public taste is something you and I don't directly control. We participate in it, but we certainly don't control it to the point where we can use that to generate which kind of a job is going to be hot for us. We can even use, one of the things I would refer you to is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which generates some very helpful kind of information. I could not make it do what I wanted it to do, so I'm going to drop back about 10 years, 20 years, and look at what's actually going on. But in this situation, basically, whoops, I didn't mean to get to that yet, so let me back off that for a minute. Salaries back in the 80s by physicians actually climbed about almost 50% during that decade. Child care workers also increased their salaries by about a third during the 80s. Nurses' salaries increased about 17%, and editors, reporters increased about 13%. Contrast that with what we would predict would be going on now, between now and 10 years from now. And in that case, the need for physicians remains strong, so that is likely to at least remain stable, probably increase. Child care workers, that's a growth field right now, because as you know, more and more families are becoming dual career families, and as soon as you establish that, you've basically got to have child care workers, people to take care of your youngsters while you're in employ. Nursing is a major demand field right now, not so much because the jobs are extraordinary in comparison to any other field, but simply the fact that relatively few people have gone into nursing. And so the result is right now, salaries in nursing are going way up in the late aught years. Editors and reporters, on the other hand, things are a little more pessimistic, because what's tending to happen now is, and we can see it happening, is that print newspaper is tending to be on the wane. It's tending to gradually go away. We're relying more and more on the internet, and that kind of investigative reporting may ultimately be lost as the lack of public support for print newspapers occurs. So there are a number of ways in which we can kind of look at what's going on and predict which are going to be strong careers, which aren't. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a very good place to look for that kind of information. And so then the second thing that I wanted to point out is the role the chance will play in your career, and it will play a role, I guarantee you. You may remember in the last lecture I was talking about the work of Albert Bandura. And in my own situation, I was engaged, just to show you an example of chance factors, I was engaged when I entered the University of Iowa for a master's degree to a woman my wife-to-be was still living in Rochester, the school, my undergraduate school. Iowa, it turned out, was not a good experience for me. I view it as the left armpit of the world, but that's just between you and me. Don't tell anybody else. Second year I was there, thinking about how to get out of there, a gentleman by the name of Howard R. Polio from the original UT, University of Tennessee, which is where I got my PhD from. It's 100 years older than the other UT, but I won't rub it in. In any case, he was looking for a job. And he came to Iowa and did a seminar in the traditional academic tradition. And I was so impressed by his presentation and the work that he was doing that I actually applied to the University of Tennessee and was accepted. And he and I clicked. And the net result was that I worked with him and got my PhD. He, in fact, was also the one that turned me on to teaching. That was strictly a chance encounter. I mean, why did he decide to come to the University of Iowa? It certainly wasn't to visit me when he was applying for a job. But it was a factor in my life, and it turned out to be a very significant factor in the way that it happened. Now, another thing related to that is the idea that make career decisions with care. Because as your undergraduate career, as with your undergraduate career, career decisions have long-term and permanent ultimate consequences. So you need to be careful in the decisions you make. But in organizing your undergraduate work, I recommend strongly that you organize your overall course activity in the following way. The first thing you should do is the core, regardless of what your selected major is when you enter. Then do your major. And then, and only then, do your electives. In other words, what I'm arguing is don't squander your electives when you're a freshman. The reason is that we've got a nice course stacked up that'll keep you busy for a year and a half, or 2 years. While you're doing those courses covering all the demands of the core, keep your eyes open. Look around to see if there's anything you stumble across that you like, that looks interesting, and you may want to pursue further. So it isn't necessarily the case. What I'm really driving toward is the idea that the average undergraduate has 3 majors during the course of his or her undergraduate career. So don't be assuming that when you're a freshman, what your major is going to be your life's work. It may not work out that way. And so when you come in initially, you're very likely to change from that particular position. And so making certain decisions also locks out other kinds of careers. If you decide on graduate school, you basically lock out medical school. If you decide on medical school, you lock out 10 years of your life. It's going to take about that long to go through the overall sequence. One of my son's, my son's best friend actually entered graduate school and decided he liked the medical aspects of it, and he actually did a joint MD, PhD, but it took almost 10 years of education to do all that. So there are, think ahead when you make career decisions, particularly in terms of deciding what to major in and so forth. Do not think of it as what was I going to say about that? It was really relevant. I'll think of it in a minute. I'm simply documenting what I've just talked about, and that is that's the sequence in which I would do that. What that preserves for you is the possibility that if you get into in the core courses, you may find a major that you'd rather engage in than the one that you're currently planning on. So keep your eyes open when you're doing the core portion, and also keep your eyes open during the major. One thing that this kind of a plan will allow you to do is to double major. Because if you look at the hours that are required, the core will take, 60 hours? A typical elective takes about 30 to 35, and that's going to leave you about 30 or 35 hours after you've done all the others, which would give you ample room to do a double major. If you have a PhD, or a bachelor's degree in psychology with a second degree in statistics, you're a strong hiring candidate in the field, because statistics are used a lot in psychology. Relatively few people major in statistics, but it can be a very important aid in that case. So just be intelligent in the way you make the decisions. What I'm really arguing is that many of these decisions are ultimately irreversible as they're made. As you spend time, you're further committed into the various decisions that you're making. You can be successful, any of us can be successful doing a wide variety of different things. One implication of the fact that one implication of this is the fact that the workforce has been moving increasingly toward temporary employment. An ever-growing number of people are temporarily employed. And what this is saying basically is that particularly with the economic downturn that was experienced in the late 80s, early 90s, and that we have also gone through during the late naught years, early into the teen years, in both cases, it's forced a lot of people from permanent employment into, at best, temporary employment. And this may be a significant change in the work environment that is occurring. That is, that we're moving toward temporary employment as a major way of doing life. And what it's really suggesting is that you may have a lot of different careers during the course of your career. So career choices are going to be made essentially throughout your work life. And if you will re-examine this thing that we were talking about here a minute ago, John Holland's model, you'll notice that there are a wide variety of approaches that can be used. Artistic versus conventional, social versus realistic, investigative versus enterprising. There are a lot of different approaches to earning a living that are feasible for us. And this overall theory is summative, basically, but it also is going to factor in, it's not a lifetime decision is basically what I'm arguing, but it's one of the things that is going to factor in here is the fact that your personal life is a key element in the kind of things that you'll ultimately do best as a career. Things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs is an important element to consider. What are the things that really float your boat most effectively? Theories X, Y, and Z are looking at the interaction between the individual worker and the working environment. Your interests can be summarized by there are several tests that I would recommend. One is the strong interest inventory. And to give you a personal testament to how effective that is, when I was a sophomore at the University of Rochester, I was already into my second choice. I started as an engineer, I switched to medicine, and I still wasn't really happy. The grades were not significantly high, so my father, in his infinite wisdom, encouraged me to go do a 3-day test of interest during the spring vacation of my sophomore year. And that was when I first stumbled across the strong interest inventory. And the end result of that, after 2 days of testing during vacation, no less, what a sacrifice. But the net result of that was that it was suggested that I had the potential for a PhD in psychology at a time when I had never even had a psychology course. So careers are the kind of thing, yes, you can plan, but you can also accept outside advice from. People have measured it before. They can take your interests and convert it into a wide variety of different career options. So I would encourage you to consider things like the Strong Campbell and the kind of measures that you get out of that. So you're one of the key components in establishing your career is going to be your personality. They are lifelong decisions, but one of the key elements that's going to impact you is the personality that you carry into that. What this curve is basically going to generate here is the idea of career development. That is, one of the best was offered by, I'll get to that in a minute, but what I wanted to show you here was the extent, the flexibility that can be built into a career. When you're 18 or 19, among males who were measured in this particular study, you'll notice that almost 40% of them changed their jobs at least once during the interval of 18 or 19. Later on, what happens then is that as the increase in age, the number of changes that occurs goes down. And so in this case, what we see is that by the age interval 20 to 24, only about a quarter of all people have made a job change in that situation. When we get to 25 to 34, the number is actually halved again. It's down to, or halved, it's down to about 12 or 13% make job changes. And basically from that, 35 to 45, we're down to about 5 or 6% making job changes. And by 45 to 54, it's down to only 3% of the workers in that age range actually making job changes. So part of that is basically, of course, the idea that we work ourselves into particular kinds of orientation. There may also be evidence of age discrimination here. That is, to a certain extent, as someone ages, the opportunities are simply removed from them. Well, we shouldn't hire that person, they're too old, they're going to retire, and so forth. So there are a lot of different factors, but the net result is your options are going to be cut down the older you get. And given that we're talking about a permanent kind of decision, you do need to pay attention as you're making career decisions in going through these things. And as I said, your personality is the key in this particular situation. I'm fumbling here because I've lost my place in my notes. Give me just a second to read here and see where I wanted to jump. Okay, now we're back to where I wanted to be, and that was to mention another very interesting test that you could use is one that I would strongly recommend to you, and that's the Myers-Briggs. This is a very interesting test because what it is basically is a type indicator. It'll definitely have an impact on the kind of careers you're most likely to enjoy, but it turns out it's also a good predictor of what type of instructor you are most likely benefiting from. Most likely going to benefit from. Some of you will do better on a small seminar, face-to-face, mano a mano, in your experience. Others of you are likely to be in a much better situation if you're in a large lecture hall, 14 rows back, 3 seats over, totally lost in the crowd. For some people, that's a better way it's a way in which they feel more comfortable being educated by the system. But it's the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and I would strongly recommend that you might want to go get that, take that test. We'll be covering it in more detail, hopefully with a guest in a section on coping later on during the semester. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now, but it would be instructive if you want to go ahead and take that test even now, so that you'll be familiar with it when we get to the point where we want to talk about it. Now, if we look at various stages of career development, one of the best analyses of this was offered by an IO, an industrial organizational psychologist by the name of Donald Super. He views a career simply as a series of positions that are held by a person during his or her lifetime. And in that situation, what he's basically arguing, he identifies a number of different stages, many of which will be quite familiar to you here as I describe them. And the first is the growth stage, from creation to age 14 or so, as a rough estimate. No interest at all at age 0 blends into fantasies about working. Maybe you decide at age 3 that you're going to be a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger as a career option. That's one possibility. Likes and dislikes, even from hobbies, tend to prevail in that kind of decision making. For years, I wanted to be an engineer, not a mechanical, but rather a locomotive engineer, simply because electric trains were one of my major hobbies when I was a youngster. And those can impact career choices, the kind of things you're gaining information on, and so forth. But ultimately, your adeptness and ability in any given field becomes the basis for selecting by the end of this stage as you move into high school and beyond. That leads then into the exploration stage, 15 to 24, which is really where the options are perhaps greatest in this overall theory. I did the exploration as a paperboy. That is, I never envisioned that as becoming my life's work, but it was definitely a source of income. It can be based on needs, it can be based on interests, capabilities, opportunities. All of those in some ways came together so that I ended up with about 100 customers in a paper route that was conveniently just right next to my house, so I didn't have to walk very far in that situation. But when I entered the University of Rochester as an engineer, the other kind, I did so as my selected major because my father was an engineer. He had friends, I wanted friends, and therefore I tried engineering along with a set of scores that actually suggested that was something I might consider. That is, I had an appropriate balance of interest for that. The first real job is entered once basic career decisions have been made. In my case, what I did was work at some various summer camps around the country during the summer, and I was even thinking about that as a career at one point, becoming a camp director. What I couldn't figure out was what to do with the other 9 months of my life between end of summer and the beginning of the next summer. I didn't know what to do with that, so that one fell by the wayside. But eventually, my first real job was 3 summers of employment as a graduate research assistant at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, related to my interest at that time in medicine, which was my second career choice. And then ultimately, my ultimate skills showed up in a rather strange way, and that is the extent to which accidents may dictate a career is classically illustrated in my case. When I took the GRE, preparing to go into graduate school, I was stunned when I got the results back. I had a math score of 99. I've always had high math. I can do math with my eyes shut forever. I've always been easy at that. What stunned me was that my English percentage was 97. I knew that was a measurement error. You know, anytime there's a real value, you've got a normal distribution and you're going to be somewhere in it. Well, in that case, it bounced real high for me. So I was walking around entering graduate school with a GRE of 99 in math, 97 in English. That's reasonably impressive. And the net result is that my experimental psych instructor at the University of Rochester was an Iowa graduate. Well, at the time, Iowa was the top experimental psych program in the country. And he wrote a very encouraging letter for me, and in fact got me into the University of Iowa because they were enamored of GRE scores. So because by accident I happened to have a very high set of scores, particularly in English, I ended up going to the University of Iowa, which when I entered, my goal was clinical psychology. But it turns out the University of Iowa at that time did not have a clinical psychology graduate program. I didn't realize that till I got into the school. And by that time I was stuck in the middle of Iowa and it didn't have many options. So I developed an experimental master's degree. And by the time I finished at Iowa and met Howard Polio, as I talked earlier, I was clearly on a track toward experimental psychology, which is the training I ultimately got. Next stage in Super's theory is basically the establishment stage, ages 25 to 44. Early in this stage, there are starts, there are false starts, there are likely to be changes based on poor choices. But late in this stage, say 30 onward in terms of age, usually you have reached the point where there is a stable work period of 10 or 15 years. This is very consistent with the theory that Levinson developed that we mentioned somewhat earlier in the course here. Next comes the maintenance stage, basically age 45 to 65. Here, one becomes concerned about the goals and the rewards that have already been achieved in a given area. I call it the yellowed notes stage of college professors as the maintenance stage. And this, in turn, will lead into one that sounds pessimistic. I don't like this label, but I haven't figured out a better one. And that is the decline stage. It's kind of implied that from 65 onward, it's just steadily downhill. What is happening is, theoretically, and for most people at that age, what they're beginning to do is to slow down in terms of their activity by way of career and they're backing away from that career. Family, for instance, becomes ever more important, and retirement is a very real possibility, whether it's forced by the industry you're in or just the next stage that you want to move into. Some psychologists, for instance, transformational psychologists, would essentially argue that the retirement offers people a rebirth. My own father was an example of that. He retired as an engineer in the Department of Energy in Washington, and when he retired at age 72, I think it was, he actually got into Meals on Wheels. He volunteered time on Meals on Wheels, and by the time he finished with that, he was done with that by about 75 or 76. He was already up to the vice president's level in the greater Washington metro area, and it was completely different. I mean, it was voluntary work, but he was very good at it, very interested in it, and that was just a classic example of a total change in activity that was simply, it was retirement in one sense. It was moving away from his original career, but definitely not in terms of moving away from society or contributing to it. It is not, for most people, a disappointing time of life. It really alters one's own view of lifetime satisfaction in that kind of a situation. So then what we're going to face is, okay, at some point you've got to get yourself hired. One of the things you need to do is get information about the career. Talk to your professors. Go to the library. Visit career planning and placement here at the U of H. Our guest at the end of the program today is Marilyn Wade, who is related to the Career Planning and Placement Center, and she'll have some very interesting thoughts to share with you at the end of the program. Go to the library. Look at the information that is available for any particular career. Undergraduate career, I would say, is composed of three basic elements. One is the curricular or in-class activities that you're engaged in. What are you studying? What program of studies are you engaged in? There are two others also that are important, however, in terms of the career that you're ultimately preparing yourself for. One is extracurricular activities. What clubs do you get into? Is it sailing? Is it hiking? Is it debate? I mean, it just depends kind of on what your career interests are in this particular situation. The third element is jobs. What you want to do is to use your part-time work for experience, or use summer work for experience. In both cases, you want to coordinate all three of those elements excuse me, for maximum effectiveness. You want to, in the best of all undergraduate experiences, you're going to coordinate the courses you're taking with the extracurricular activities you're involved in, with the jobs that you hold, and integrate those in such a way that what you build is a very strong vita to present to the next person who's going to employ you in one way or another. And in that situation then, let me just go back and review with you the idea that there are a number of predictable changes that take place in careers. And if you look in the early 2000s, the growth disciplines include things like computer software engineers, computer systems analysts, post-secondary teachers, that's graduate school basically, undergraduate and graduate school, registered nurses, management and analysis, and then general operations managers. All of those would be growth fields in the 2000s. And once you've made a decision as to what you want to do, the other thing you need to do then is eventually summarize it all and prepare a resume of what you've done at this point. Plan very carefully what your resume looks like, because that's the thing that's going to sell you. That's the summary of your life work. And make sure that you spend some time. Identify yourself, first of all, at the top, centered. Give your name, your address, and a telephone number. It's much easier to find a phone if you have, it's much easier to find a job if you have a phone. Make sure that there is a way that somebody can reach you, whether email or phone, essentially instantly, because the need for somebody may develop very rapidly in a particular industry or factory that you're considering being employed by, or an organization in. Personal data, you don't have to list legally your sex, your age, or your marital status. But on the other hand, if you're trying to humanize yourself, it might be relevant to go ahead and put that in. If you do so, what you might do is include information about your children, about your place of birth, even what your general health is. Industry is, of course, interested in that. Another thing you might want to put in, although you need to be careful with this, is a career objective. I normally cover that in a letter, and I'll tell you why here in a minute, but be specific when you establish a career objective, but don't exclude yourself from the job. Don't write it so tightly and so precisely that somebody's going to look at it and say, well, it doesn't fit, and set you aside. The goal is to keep that thing in somebody's hand with fascinating writing and data. The reason I use a cover letter is that what you will find in general is if you personalize the employment application process, target a particular person to the extent you can do so, and write that person a letter that includes basically your educational background and what you're interested in doing. I'll come back and talk about the cover letter more in a minute, but the next thing in the Vita you want to do is to list your educational background. I would list everything above high school. The presumption is that if you're applying for a college graduate degree, you did pass high school. I wouldn't even bother to list the high school. But within the educational environment, list in terms of what's called reverse order. Start with whatever you're in now and list backward from there by dates, which segment you're in at that time. List in what's called reverse order, putting the most recent, the most advanced first in the list. Employment, same thing. Start with the most recent employment and list backwards in that section from what you've most recently held to your earlier activities in a given situation. You can also then list in another section extracurricular activities and interests, but only list them if they're related to the job that you're applying for. If you're applying for a forest ranger, listing the fact that you belong to a hiking club at the University of Houston would make a lot of sense. If you're applying for an electronic job in a computer firm, really doesn't make a lot of sense in that situation. References are another thing that is kind of tricky. Include or mention them in a cover letter. Be very careful of your references. Okay, specifically what I'm referring to there is the idea that you want to shelter them. You do not want to have a particular reference, particularly a valued reference. You do not want to have them deluged with companies that you're thinking about applying to, all contacting them for letters of reference. Okay, so one way to do that is simply to list those people only in the cover letter. Don't include it on your Vita. Cover the references, personal references, with addresses in the cover letter itself. And in fact, in that cover letter, in some cases, what I will do for the most valuable references I have is to include in the letter something to the effect of please let me know, or please inform me if you're going to contact this person, and I will clear it with them. I will make them aware of your contact. And again, it's just to protect the quality of the letters that they're likely to write. If somebody's written 100 letters for you, they may not be writing quite the strongest letter to get you employed, which is ultimately the goal here. Extra material can be things like professional licenses, affiliations, publications, special skills. Really, I would include them in the situation where they're relevant. Then let's talk about the cover letter. Address it to a named person if you can possibly do that. Make your first paragraph be an attention getter. Name someone in the company. Name a company product. Name a paper written by the addressee, the person you're writing to. Second paragraph, demonstrate that you did some work. Mention something about the company operations as one possibility, or their growth, or their personnel or organizations. Something about the company to indicate you're familiar with them, you know them. Okay? Third paragraph, identify how your skills and experience fit in with the job for which you're applying. Introduce your resume. And finally then, what you do is to make a request that requires a response. I picked this up out of a text from which I was drawing the notes here. I never thought about that when I was actually applying for jobs in my career. But if you make a request that requires them to respond, you ask for a form or request an interview, that's going to put the ball in their court very firmly and gives them a reason to write back to you. Which many other people, you know, when they've got then the choice, well, here's somebody that's interested enough to ask for Form 37QXW in our hierarchy, or whatever it is. But give them a reason to recontact you, essentially, is what I'm suggesting there. And then what you're going to do after you've developed all this fine stuff is to develop that cover letter, which I forgot to tell you, and make sure that you proofread your resume and your cover letter. Proofread it. Okay? Make sure you proofread it. And then what you can also do is let someone else read. And did I mention that you should proofread what you've produced? Nothing will lose a job faster for you than an error in a letter. You're supposed to know good English and how to use it. Make sure that you proofread what you're putting out under your name, because that's going to be with you forever in that company. Then, once you've prepared this perfect resume and cover letter, then what you want to do is to get an interview. That's another task that we have to do. If want ads and mass mailings aren't good, what is? Well, there are a lot of different sources that you can use. One is personal network. Family members. If you're going into a career that's related to your family, family members may be able to point you in a particular direction or know within the social network of who's got a job available. Past instructors in college, another good place to look for that kind of contact. Use your contacts from summer jobs or part-time employment, anything like that. You can register with the College Placement Service, which we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes. State employment, state offices, back up a little bit. States normally have an employment office. That would be another possible place where you could register yourself. Or you could even go to a commercial placement office. A little more expensive, but they put their own self on the griddle there, and they're under some pressure to find a job for you in that situation. I knew one student who typed very well. And so what she did was go to what used to be called Kelly Girls. I looked in the book today and discovered it isn't there any longer, probably because they used to call themselves Kelly Girls. So instead, what you think about is going to a secretarial service or a professional help service. I'm sure they've made the title a lot more dignified than it used to be. But she actually worked in that case for Kelly Girls at a time when that was an appropriate source of employment. And she worked for a year all around the city. I mean, she would come in at various times between jobs and relate some of the things that she had been doing all around Houston. It was just a great way to look at all parts of the city and the various employments that were available. And then what she did was when she was ready to apply for a permanent job, she actually sat down after a year and kind of reviewed her experiences up to that point as a Kelly girl, a typing assistant. And then she simply rank ordered the industries from the most to the least preferred and applied. And she had been good enough as a typist that, in fact, that first company hired her. But she had done the job, and in that case, the cover letter basically wrote itself. She kind of listed what she'd been doing for the previous year, and of all the companies I've looked at, yours is the one I'd like to work for. Well, that kind of a come-on is very strong. I mean, there's a company that has competed face-to-face against all the other industries that she worked for, and it's won in that particular competition. And so that's a smart, one among many smart ways to get yourself an interview, ultimately in a situation. Now, when you're preparing for an interview, you need to think of it as an opportunity. You also need to think of it as a performance. You have to recognize that interviewers vary at least as widely in skills as those they are interviewing. Okay, there is a huge normal distribution of abilities in any given interviewer as there is in the abilities of those that they're interviewing. In fact, I'm sure I've already told you, but there is a personal case that is relevant here, and that is my wife. Ultimately, after she graduated college, was looking for a permanent source of employment, and I had suggested, knowing her interests, I'd suggested something in sales, and particularly Continental happens to be my favorite airline. And I suggested she go over there and interview for a job there, because at that time they were hiring. And she ran into a white-haired Southern lady of a bigot, who simply did not react positively to anybody that had darker skin. My wife was Indian in that situation. She never got past first base in that interview. I could turn that back and comment on the skill of her as a personnel selector, but the story pretty well tells itself. And that is that essentially she went back 3 years later, again at my encouragement, because the company, the airline, was hiring again. And that time she blew through the interview, and I think I've already told you, I won't burden you with it, but she ended up in sales on the phone line because they put everybody there. That's kind of the clearinghouse for new employees. And she liked it so much, and she was so good at it, that she's still in there. She's now up a bit in management, but she still keeps her hand in being on the phone. You're likely to talk to her if you buy a ticket from that particular airline. But that was just an example of a decision maker that didn't make a good decision for the company, because they cost themselves several years of a top producer on the market. She could sell a trip to an Eskimo in the middle of winter to the backwoods of Alaska. I haven't seen it happen, but I've heard stories about so if you're intense and good in the area that you're trying to get into, the job will be there for you, and all you have to do is convince people. When you're preparing for that interview, you need to be pleasant, you need to be knowledgeable, read about the company. Nothing will get you further than dropping in something, particularly if the person doesn't even know it, about the company. Be knowledgeable, okay? Be assured and concise in your answers. Don't dazzle them with your vocabulary. Answer the question, okay? Show that you know something about your field in general and even about the company that you're interviewing for particularly. There's a book by Martin and Osborne back in 1993 that talks about 5 steps that you need to go through in preparing for an interview. One is learn as much as possible about the company or the agency that you're seeking a job with. Second, learn as much as you can about the process you will go through. What time is going to be involved in the interview itself, what subjects are going to be covered by the company, what are they interested in, who's going to be interviewing you. Learn as much about that as you're able to. Third, think through your answers to possible questions. As you're thinking about the company you're engaged with, think about how you might answer. Fourthly, develop questions that you would like to get answers to. How are you going to be evaluated? Is there an evaluation scheme, and how does it work in the company? Is there an opportunity for overtime? What's the policy on sick leave? I'm not planning to be sick, but if I were, what would be the coverage that I could count on? What are the health benefits that you offer? And so forth. I mean, just things related to you're offering your services to a company, and in turn it's fair to ask, in turn, what can the company do for you? What are the relative benefits that they're offering you in that situation? And number 5, and in caps, practice, okay? Sit somebody down who's a friend, give them the questions that they need to ask, and encourage them to ask hard questions of you if they're the vice president of the International Widget or wherever you're going for the job interview. Practice with a friend to see how well you can handle, and encourage that friend to spring some surprises on you in the course of the interview. Now that you're working, some other things can crop up here. One of them, of course, is that you may have some problems. And so in that case, job stress can be a factor here. View it as an opportunity. Kind of job stress that you may get will be things like, I'm in the wrong occupation. I shouldn't be doing this. Value conflicts between you and the company that may be involved. Interworker conflict. There may be somebody that you don't like with the company who's in the group who's working with you. There may be too much work. You may be simply burdened with too many things to work with. There may be too little work. You may be sitting there bored. That would be a good opportunity to go contact the boss and make a suggestion like, I can handle more. Is there something else I can help you with? That would, boy, a boss would love you for that kind of a thing, unless she is also underemployed. You may be stuck in repetitive, unstimulating, boring kind of tasks. It may be an unfavorable environment. Something as simple as heat or noise can be a real problem in this kind of a situation in some cases. You may be feeling exploited. You may not be feeling appreciated or recognized or rewarded for your efforts in a given situation. Difficulty keeping up with advances in your field. That's something that we very often face in computer work these days. Debilitating illness or injuries may hinder your work later on in the situation. There may even be discrimination, prejudice, or bias that can be registered. There are formal solutions to some of those. Others you simply need to get yourself, I mean, if that does become a problem in an environment, move out. Go find another job. Use your day offs to go find a better place to work. You can at least take with you the experience that you had and put it on your Vita. In any case, another problem we may trip over is what's called workaholism. Okay? That's defined essentially as a condition characterized by spending too much time at work. Okay? There are those who genuinely love work and are just there because they just enjoy the job all the time. And there are also those that may be working because they're driven by a compulsion, whether it be driven by anxiety or insecurity. That can lead to alcoholism. Listen to me. Alcoholism can be a part of the workaholism that may happen. The difficulty is that what this may lead to then is burnout. which we define simply as a condition caused by overwork which leads to lowered productivity, motivation, and energy with respect to work. Such workers can be very poor given the impact that this may have. Depressed, apathetic, irritable. Work can have a major impact if you're not well suited to the job that you're in. The solution, of course, is find the cause of the problem and remove it if it's physical. And if it's psychological, seek counseling so that you can increase your psychological awareness of the factors that you're overreacting to in a given situation. Might even involve getting into something like meditation or taking time off. There's no law against taking some time off. And then ultimately, if you're going to be getting ahead, which is the goal through all this, one key to doing that is essentially communication. Okay, we have a complete chapter on this later in the course, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now. But there are several key elements involved in communication. One thing is learning to listen. Okay, learn to listen. And when you do that, you don't do it, it's hindered by daydreaming. When somebody's talking to you, do not sit there thinking about last night's date or tonight's date. Think only about concentrating on the person you're listening to or trying to listen to there. Listen for facts, not for ideas and central themes, okay? Listen for facts. Judging irrelevant aspects of the speaker, their hair, their clothes, anything like that, before understanding what's being said, communicated to you, is not a good use of your time. Okay, focus on mannerisms rather than focusing on mannerisms rather than content is another way to screw yourself up in this situation. So it's summarized essentially by describing that what I've just described there is summarized sometimes as listening against rather than listening to someone. Kind of keep that in mind. Make eye contact, remain still. Don't clean your ear with a pencil when you're in the middle of an interview. Okay, because then you're going to pull it out and want to look at it and see what you've produced there. Don't do that. Keep it relevant to what you're trying to do in the particular interview. Secondly, learn to get instructions. Learn to give instructions, okay? Many people are poor listeners, and it takes a certain amount of coordinated effort on your part to relay information, particularly when the sequencing is important, to make sure that it's relayed properly to someone who's listening, because you have to assume they may not be as sharp at it as you are, okay? Be consistent in both overt and covert communication. I am not peeved. It's not the way to communicate the fact that you're not peeved. Either acknowledge that you are or express it more warmly. I'm not peeved is much better than the former example I gave you. A churlish voice doesn't communicate the same thing that a happy voice does. Okay? Mention time frames. Think about this. Clean your room to a child means within the month. To your parents, it means within the next hour. So communicate those time plans and understand what the effect of it is. Okay? Be willing to repeat. You know it cold. The person you're talking to may not in a given situation. Your listener simply may not know it at all, for that matter. So take the time. Okay? All this boils down to the following hints in general. Make sure that you have their attention. First of all, are they looking at you? Be specific. Provide clear descriptions of what you're trying to convey to them in any situation. Spell out specifically what is to be done in a particular situation. Limit the number of instructions at any one time. I was thinking about that as I was writing the lecture. I've hit you with 38,000 details today, but it's in the book, and I would trust you to go back over it. Ask the listener, now this is key, ask the listener to repeat or paraphrase what he or she has heard, and listen, because that will be very instructive to you in terms of what you're actually communicating to people. One of the best tests of your efficacy as a communicator is to ask people to say back to you what they've heard, what they understood. And that's a real crucial test to whether you are in fact communicating effectively or not in a given situation. And so you listen basically to correct both yourself and your style of presentation, as well as your listener, which in turn leads to another key element in overall learning communication skills, and that is learn how to give criticism. Okay, make your criticism constructive when you give that. Don't do it when you're angry. If you notice a problem and you get explosive about it, do not correct it right then. Just file it away, and the next time you're calm and in an engaged conversation with that person, then is the time to drop in. By the way, I noticed the other day you were thus and so. it seems to me it would be more effective if you this and so, or whatever, okay? Don't do it in public. Don't humiliate somebody in public, because that's going to create backlash on your part, on their part, I mean. They're going to want to get back at you, also in public, or worse, behind the scenes. Don't speak in generalities. Make it specific to whatever the problem is that you've got that you're trying to work on. Don't blame, don't moralize, don't threaten. That's not going to work, okay? Well, it will work, but not the way you want it to. Don't bring up old history. It is old history. Move past it. Timing is important. Make sure that the correction is within the range of when the error was experienced, but don't beat them over the head with it when you raise it. Try to adopt essentially, be relaxed essentially, and try to adopt a kind of an us against the problem attitude. That will go a long way toward, opening up a conversation with essentially, what do you think we ought to do about, and raise it as a general issue. Stick to the main points and keep that main point limited. Keep focused on what you're trying to say in a given situation. Would suggest that you end on a positive note. For all the things that you may have gone through trying to change somebody's behavior, end positively and give them a chance to respond. It isn't enough just to talk at them. You need to also let them talk to you, and that will warm up the ultimate exchange and the effect of it. If you have to disagree, disagree warmly. That seems kind of strange, but what I'm suggesting is that what you try to do is convert a no-win situation into a win-win. Not a lose-win, but a win-win situation. Learn to accept criticism. Those people who talk back to you have something that's important they want to say, so make sure that you appreciate what they're saying also. Listen, remain attentive, same skills I was talking about earlier, and acknowledge screw-ups when they occur. If you've fouled up, be the first one to acknowledge it, okay? I told you, and I had not anticipated thus and so. So acknowledge if you screw up in a given situation. It will go a long way toward increasing your power as a leader in that situation. Give compliments, okay? Give positive strokes sincerely. We all like them. They don't happen very often. But we should give warm fuzzies, as they're called sometimes in the literature, okay? Be aware of the distinctions between genuine praise, general praise, and prescriptive praise that is targeted at reinforcing specific behaviors. In certain situations, you need to make the praise very specific to improving a particular kind of response or behavior in a given situation. Overall, the golden rule is that the best way to succeed in an organization is to make the boss look good. He or she is hired to make money for the company or to create a new stunning program in an academic environment or whatever. And the best way to get ahead in the organization is to help the person who is your supervisor do his or her job even better. That makes you valuable in their environment and increases the likelihood that when they need somebody to help them, you're the one they will come to. It also builds a much stronger letter of reference for you out of that situation. And so from that, what we're going to go into is a discussion with Marilyn Wade, who has waded in here on my side, as I wondered how I was going to segue from all this stuff I've been talking about to you. But who are you?
Oh, pleasure to be here, Dr. Cashel. I'm Marilyn Wade. I'm Assistant Director of Alumni Career Services here at University of Houston. And Alumni Career Services is a small component of University Career Services, which is here on campus.
I was amazed when I heard your title that alumni is the group that you're working with. I want to come back and talk about that later, but I want to make sure we come back to that. One question I did want to ask you is that if you were going to give one piece of advice, what would you say is the most important thing that college students ought to understand that they might not even be aware of as they're moving through their university education?
You know, I would say the one bit of advice that I would give to college students today is to not just focus on their academic career. Certainly the academic career is very important. You want to make sure that you're getting great grades while you're in school, but employers today are just as interested in the skills and the experience that you have to offer even upon graduation. Mm-hmm. So students today should not wait until the very last minute in order to get that level of skills and relevant experience that they will need in order to enter the workforce today. Employers today are very interested in the skills and experience that you have to offer that's relevant to the career field that you're looking to get into.
So among those three things I was talking about, the undergraduate courses, the job that you have at the same time, and the other things that feed into that really is the basis for what you're saying.
Most definitely.
Key elements.
Most definitely. You want to complement your education with relevant experience. That experience that you get can be volunteer work that you do on campus or off campus. It can also mean the extracurricular activities that you take advantage of right here on the campus. Certainly leadership opportunities that are presented to you. Opportunities to work in part-time jobs or in jobs part-time on campus, as well as internship opportunities, which are valuable, certainly invaluable to one's career development.
And the Career Center actually has a list of part-time jobs, do they not?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So that people tend to think of only going there at the end, and then perhaps they ought to go there early.
Oh boy, absolutely not. Students should get started in visiting the Career Center right away. I highly recommend that students take advantage of all of the resources that we provide. We provide job listings for all types of job positions, whether they're part-time jobs, internships, on-campus positions, volunteer opportunities. So certainly they'll want to come in and meet with career counselors to get some guidance in their career and guidance in finding a job that suits them.
Okie dokie. Relative to that education, would you say that the best thing to do is major either in business or engineering?
Absolutely not. I would say that students should major in business or engineering only if they, A, want to become an engineer, or only if they for sure definitely want to go into business. There are a myriad of opportunities of majors that students can take advantage of here at University of Houston. What I would certainly encourage students to do are to consider majors that are interesting to them, majors that they can excel in, because grades do matter. Employers do look for students with good grades and for an interest in whatever the subject matter is. So I would certainly encourage students to consider majors that are exciting to them, majors that perhaps they enjoyed in high school, or majors that they might find an interest in today. One great way to determine a major or decide upon a major is to work with a career counselor in our office. We have 6 career counselors at University Career Services, and we're all divided up by either program area or college. So we have career counselors that are assigned to various colleges specializing in working with students in a particular career field or a particular major that can assist those students in deciding upon a field of interest. We also have a career counselor that works with undecided students as well. So we encourage students to focus in on their career interests, on their skills, on other aspects of themselves, their values, what's important to them, to determine a major right off the bat, so that they can proceed in taking on other aspects of their career development.
Before we get past it, I wanted to drop in one other story, and that is that I co-taught a course with somebody from the Career Counseling and Placement Center many years ago, and she had an activity that I have never forgotten, and that is that what she did was to bring in, she put little cards on the wall. There were like 30 different careers just kind of taped up, crazy quilt across the wall, and then she turned to the class and said, name the undergraduate major that all of these people had in common. And the guesses were all over the wall. The atmosphere, I guess, I'm mixing metaphors there. Turned out the answer was English. The career city manager to taxi driver, just the whole array of possible careers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what you're finding here, as Dr. Cashel so richly illustrated, is that at the end of the day, certainly 5 years, 10 years, 20 years after you graduate from school, your degree will become less and less, what you majored in will become less and less important. Really what will define you and define your career is the experience that you get. So certainly, even if you decide to major in a liberal arts major, something like English, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, there are a myriad of careers that one can pursue given those majors.
Are college graduates nowadays finding professional jobs?
Absolutely. I think today, there are a lot of people that are scared about the current economy, the tough economy that we're all facing today. The good news about that is that even though the unemployment rate today is at about 10% or a little bit below 10%, The unemployment rate for college graduates is under 5%.
Wow.
So that's good news for college graduates. College graduates are that much more likely to find positions, and they're less likely to be let go of during a down economy, such as what we're experiencing now. So that is good news for college graduates. There are jobs that are available. What college graduates need to know, though, however, is that their job search might be a little bit more challenging today than it has been in years past. So that's just why college graduates today and college students today really need to prepare themselves for that job market. They need to prepare themselves by getting great experience, getting great internships, getting great volunteer work that will certainly complement the degree that they will be earning.
When you look at that is in your experience in working here, what would you say that the alumni that you work with specifically would cite most often as the thing they wish they'd done in terms of career development?
I would say a lot of alumni today regret the fact that they didn't spend time focusing in on their career goals, and they didn't take advantage of the opportunities and the resources that our office provides. They didn't take advantage of the job search strategies that we provide in terms of developing a great resume, in terms of knowing how to interview appropriately, knowing how to network appropriately within the field, which you don't need to start after you graduate. That's something that students should do right now. They should be looking to gain connections and make connections in their field now before they enter the job market. That's something that our office certainly encourages more than anything. Really, and as it relates to networking, I was thinking about it earlier today, Dr. Cashel, and really networking and developing connections within your field is like moving. It's like moving to a new neighborhood. When you move to a new neighborhood, you don't just sit at home and expect for people to come and say hello to you, although that might happen from time to time, but you really want to put yourself out there to explore that new neighborhood, to find out where the new stores are, to find out where the grocery store is, to find out where the dry cleaners is, to find out where the gas station is, so to speak. So when students are exploring career fields, when they're looking to get into a particular career, they really should explore the community of that career. They really need to really jump in with 2 feet in terms of making connections, finding out who's who within that career field, finding out where the jobs are, what the companies are, what the opportunities are within that career field. That's what a lot of alumni wish they had done when they were students. And that's something that students can do right now while they're in school.
I went back a couple of years ago to my 45th graduation anniversary at the University of Rochester, and as I thought back on it afterwards, it was amazing the number of former psych majors with me who I met and renewed acquaintances with, and you do really form a network even as an undergraduate, some elements of which carry forth with you. I'm still in contact with my roommate, for instance, from the first 2 years in college. And
absolutely.
Those kind of resources ultimately help a lot.
So certainly students should get to know the students that they're sitting next to in class. They should join professional and student organizations right when they're on campus, right when they're students, because that can become the basis for which they can learn about career opportunities, learn more about their career field, look to make connections within that circle. Absolutely.
If you had to list them, what would you say are some of the major steps that students have to do to effectively prepare themselves for the job market? How would you quantify that response to that?
That's an excellent question. I would say that students should start as early as possible. Students should first start early in the game in terms of determining who they are. Certainly doing some introspection and figuring out, what makes you tick, what turns you on, what's interesting to you, what are my skills or what skills am I willing to learn, what career fields are available to me. Doing that learning piece, exploring themselves is first that students should do. The second thing that students should do is explore their options. So what career fields are interesting to me? What's available to me given the job market? What's available to me given where I'm looking to go? What are my career goals? So students should first figure out what are they looking to achieve. Where are they looking to be upon graduation, or the first year or two after graduation? Having a good sense of what you're looking to do is definitely the first step. The second thing that students should do is to make sure that they're taking advantage of all of the opportunities on campus and off campus that will help them in achieving those career goals. As we mentioned earlier today, volunteer work, extracurricular activities, internships, part-time jobs, all of those are great resources and opportunities for students to get experience and hone their skills, gain new skills that will allow them to successfully enter the job market today. The next thing that students should do is to practice their job search strategies when they're a little bit, when they're seniors or ready to enter the job market. They should definitely consider all that's available to them through University Career Services. Again, we have a myriad of opportunities for students to get experience in putting together a great resume. We have lots of resources for students in terms of connecting with professionals and interviewing and networking, and a lot of different things that students can take advantage of that they should.
I have a 30-second question for you,
sure.
And that is, should students consider graduate school as an option?
Well, graduate school, it can be an option for students, but I would caution students against considering graduate school if, A, they're unfocused. Okay, so a student shouldn't necessarily consider graduate school just as a last-minute resort. Okay, or students shouldn't consider graduate school if they're afraid of entering the job market.
Okay, we're going to cut you off. Marilyn Wade, great, thanks. Big help.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's been a pleasure.
Alrighty.
Thank you.